Thank all of you for joining us on this bright, sunny morning. There's no better way to wake up in the morning than with a little bit of philosophy, as I've always said. So I want to start with a philosopher, one of my favorite philosophers back in ancient Greece. And he wasn't just any philosopher. His name was Diogenes of Shinobi. And Diogenes was probably the closest thing philosophy has ever produced to a troll. He would show up at Socrates' lectures and eat loudly to interrupt them. He lived in this ceramic barrel in his local marketplace in Corinth. And everybody just thought he was kind of really loud, rude, outrageous, offensive. But he was deeply admired by Alexander the Great, who was arguably the most powerful person in the world at the time. It's said that one day Alexander finally visited Diogenes in the marketplace, going up to his barrel, and said, "Diogenes, I will grant any one wish you desire. Just tell me what you would want, and it will be yours." And Diogenes could have asked for anything, but he was lying in the sun at the time, and true to his trollish, punkish form, he replied to Alexander, "Stand out of my light." And I love this story for many reasons, but a big one is because I think it has lessons for how we ought to respond to the Alexanders of our time, our digital technologies and the people who create them. Because like Alexander, they've come into our lives and offered to fill all sorts of needs and wishes. And in many ways, they have extremely well. But we're starting to realize that in so doing, they've also been standing in a light, so to speak. And one particular light, the light of our attention, a light that is so precious and so essential for human flourishing that without this light, all the other benefits that technology brings us might not do us very much good. And I think something profound and potentially irreversible is happening to human attention in the digital age. I think it's more than just distraction, it's more than addiction, it's more than manipulation. It's more than just some minor annoyance. And I think the way that we respond to this challenge could very well be the defining moral and ethical and political question of our time. So what I'd like to do this morning is to tell you why I think so and what we can start to do about it. So we say that we live in the information age, which in a sense is true. There's more information around us than ever before. But as Herbert Simon pointed out in the 1970s, when information becomes abundant, attention becomes the scarce resource. There's a kind of figure ground inversion that takes place. And this has happened so quickly and so recently that we're still just coming to terms with what this means for all sorts of human systems. But because attention is the scarce resource now, it's the object of competition among most of the digital technologies we use every day. And the environment of this competition we call sometimes the attention economy. So in the attention economy, there are no free products. There are only ones we pay for with our attentional labor. And technologies win in the attention economy when they capture and exploit as much of that attentional labor as they can. And they use that attentional labor to direct it towards their goals and not ours. And there is a difference between their goals and ours. So if you think about the goals that you have for yourself, whether it's today, the reasons for attending the next web, the goals you have this week, this year, and even beyond, they're probably things like, I want to spend more time with family, or I want to learn how to play piano, or I want to take that trip I've been thinking about. You know, these are real human goals that we have in our lives. But if you look at what technologies in the attention economy are trying to maximize in our lives, it's not that sort of thing usually. Instead, it's usually things like getting us to spend as much time with them as possible, or to click or tap as much as possible, or to see as many ads or pages as possible. Now, no one I know has those goals for themselves, right? Does anyone wake up in the morning and think, how much time can I possibly spend on Facebook today? Very few people, if anyone. But what this means is that there's a deep and fundamental gap between the goals we have for our lives and the goals that most of our technologies are designed to steer our lives toward. And this seems to me to be a really big moral problem. Because ultimately what it means is that the inconvenient truth of the attention economy is that its technologies are not on our side. They're adversarial a lot of the time. Their goals are not our goals. And these are distractions from the goals of life. But that's exactly the opposite of what technology is for. But the thing is, the creators of technologies know this very well. Steve Jobs didn't let his children use the iPad. A little while back, the CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, said, in addition to Snapchat and YouTube, one of their major competitors was sleep. When the boundaries of space and time have been broken down, we have to kind of bring our own boundaries to the task. And this is an enormous challenge, and I think crisis, of self-regulation. And it's amplified by the speed at which all of our technologies are changing. There's this kind of phenomenon I like to think of as a treadmill of incompetence, where if you think about the amount of time it took technologies to reach 150 million users. For the telephone, it was 89 years, so multiple lifetimes, where we could figure out what a technology is doing, figure out how to adapt to it, and bend it to our own needs. But as we get further into electric and then digital technologies, so you see the TV was 38 years, the mobile phone was 14 years, internet, Facebook, Instagram, all less. And as you know, an app or a service could go viral and get 150 million users, potentially even in a day. And so all of this is creating this crisis, I think, of it's kind of this persuasion, this environment of total persuasion. And it's also amplified by kind of two parallel trends in the last couple of decades. One is the way in which psychology has cataloged all sorts of psychological biases, buttons in our brains that can be punched to get us to think or do certain things. And in parallel with that, advertising as an industry has essentially colonized the internet and turned it into a large-scale platform for industrial strength persuasion of measurement, optimization, targeted message delivery. And this is the way that we're monetizing most of the information in the world now. Furthermore, this persuasive power is now more centralized than ever in history. Never in history have a few people at a few companies been able to shape the attentional habits of over 1 billion of the world's people. Alexander the Great could have never dreamed of that kind of power. So I think that, as Aldous Huxley said about the defenders of freedom in his time, that they'd failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. I think we have to admit that in the design of digital technologies, we've made exactly the same mistake. But it seems to me that if we're at all serious about promoting human freedom and self-determination in the digital age, we have to start taking these distractions into account right now. So what would it mean to do that? I think it would mean starting to assert and defend our freedom of attention. Now, this is a type of freedom that we've always had, but never really needed to assert or defend in the past, because there wasn't much in our world that could seriously challenge it. But I think we can find good precedent for this freedom in some of the great writers on the subject. For instance, John Stuart Mill, who in On Liberty wrote, "The appropriate region of human liberty comprises first the inward domain of consciousness. The first freedom is the freedom of mind." He continues, "This principle requires a liberty of tastes and pursuits, of framing the plan of our life to suit our own character." So what this suggests to me then is that we need to start thinking more broadly about what we mean by attention in order to take into account the full set of distractions that we are now dealing with in our lives. Because normally when we think of attention, we think of the spotlight of attention, which is kind of the type of attention you're all giving me right now, which I'm very grateful for, by the way. Spotlight of attention is about navigating our immediate awareness within the task domain. It's about those capacities that help us do what we want to do. So for instance, I'm trying to read a book, and I see on my phone that Donald Trump has released yet another insane tweet. So it gets in the way of action. So distractions of our spotlight are distractions of action. But I think in the interest of deepening how we talk about attention, I think we could identify other types of attention, other lights of attention, if you will. Because over time, actions become habits. We check our phones over 150 times per day on average. Distracted moments add up to distracted days, and distracted days add up to distracted lives. And so we become distracted not just from doing what we want to do, but from being who we want to be. So if we think about attention in this broader sense of how we navigate our life by the stars of our higher goals and values, maybe we could think of this as the starlight of our attention, as opposed to just the spotlight. So if the spotlight helps us do what we want to do, the starlight of our attention helps us be who we want to be. And so when technology is standing in the starlight of our attention, it interferes with our habits or creates habits. One place we see this a lot is in infinite scrolling news feeds. So when you pull down to refresh the news feed, you're essentially kind of playing a slot machine of information. It's the same psychological dynamic of intermittent variable rewards. So when you randomize the reward schedule, the person will do the behavior that you want them to do much more. And so when technology intervenes in this level of our lives, it doesn't just make our goals its goals, it makes our values its values. It makes us more petty, more impulsive, more narcissistic, more disconnected from those values that we want to govern our lives. And I think one very brazen, bald example of this pettiness of the attention economy is a quote from the CBS CEO last February, where he said Donald Trump's candidacy may be bad for CBS, may be bad for America, may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. So when the attention economy is standing in our starlight, it doesn't just shape ourselves in its image, it shapes our politics, our society in its image. But I think we could define one more type of attention. And this is when technology gets in the way of not just our pursuit of our goals and values, but our ability to define those in the first place. We could think of this as the daylight of our attention. So not just being able to do what we want to do or to be who we want to be, but in fact to want what we want to want. And so this would be the erosion, the undermining of our fundamental capacities like reason, reflection, metacognition, intelligence. And one way we see this in our lives today is in the way in which technology and the attention economy has habituated us into this perpetual cognitive style of outrage. So outrage, the impulse to judge and punish was very valuable earlier in human evolution. In small foraging groups, it promoted moral clarity, social solidarity. It was an opportunity to signal to others that we could be trusted. But when it's amplified on a societal or even global scale, it results in rampant social division and retaliation. To just take one example, it seems like every week we have one of these outrage cascades where the entire internet erupts in anger at somebody or something. For instance, there was a dentist from Minnesota a little while back that went to Zimbabwe and killed this lion named Cecil. He shouldn't have done it. It was a stupid thing to do. It was probably illegal. But what happened to him after that was that people showed up at his place of work, putting signs on the door saying, "Rot in hell," spray painting things on his house, trying to destroy his life for this bad decision. Now, when children do this type of thing, we call it cyberbullying. But when adults do it for some reason, we think of it as karma or sweet revenge or something like that. But this is mob rule, plain and simple. And mob rule is precisely what Socrates viewed as the main route democracies take back into becoming tyrannies. So this is a big, big deal. And so I think that if we look at attention beyond just the spotlight of doing what we want to do, but the starlight that helps us be who we want to be, and the daylight that helps us want what we want to want, I think this can really help us start to talk more clearly about what's actually happening to our attention with respect to technology. And this kind of tripartite kind of view is the way that Harry Frankfurt, the philosopher at Princeton, thinks about the structure of the human will. And ultimately, in the question of attention, that's what's at stake. It's the coherence and the operation of the human will. Now, I think this is an intolerable situation. I think there is no reason why we should have to accept an adversarial relationship with our technologies. Aristotle said in Politics that it is disgraceful to be unable to use our good things. And as someone who loves technology, I do think this is disgraceful. But I do think technologies are good things. But in the way we have to navigate out of the situation is to demand that our technologies be on our side. We have to not just start asserting, but also defending our freedom of attention. So how can we start to do this? Well, the normal response is that users, individuals need to just adapt, change habits in their lives, change social kind of norms, and that this will somehow be enough. I think we have to reject this impulse on its face. This is just not tenable. This is like saying that there are thousands of the world's smartest people that go to work every day to try to undermine your willpower, so you just need to have more willpower. That just is an incoherent position to begin with. But it also doesn't mean that we need to blame the people who create these technologies. You know, these are, by and large, good, well-intentioned people, and many of them I count as my friends. They're just players in a game, and the problem is the game they're playing, the game of the attention economy. So another way to put this is that the ethical question of the attention economy is not an ethics of individual actors. It's an ethics of the infrastructure, of what Luciano Floridi, the philosopher at Oxford, calls infraethics. So what would it look like to change the system? Well, because time is limited, I can't go into the full map of all of this, but it would involve innovations in areas like language. So how can we speak in a more nuanced way about persuasion, or in a more humanized way about users? Commitment devices such as oaths, codes, things like that. Metrics, how can we up-level our metrics from being engagement metrics to fulfillment metrics? How can we better sort of measure so we can optimize to the net benefit that we're actually providing users with our design? Design paradigms, processes, principles are a part of this, as well as goals and incentives. Rethinking how we think about business models of companies and ways that we can align those with the deeper human interest. But we need some kind of mechanism, some kind of societal force to really give all of this a push in the right direction. And so what could that mechanism look like? Well, if you go to back to what I said earlier about one way to describe what we're doing when we give attention to a product is we're doing attentional labor. Every time we give attentional labor, we're paying for the product. And so when we look at this as labor, then we can formulate the nature of the problem here as twofold. One is that we're getting poor value for our attentional labor. And the second is that the conditions of our attentional labor are poor. And so throughout history, when people have been faced with a similar situation, what they've done is always to organize, to create new mechanisms of collective representation so that they can collectively negotiate with the powers of their time. But today, there is no mechanism like this. There is no way for you to have a direct voice in the design of the technologies to which you entrust your life every day. So what I think is needed is something like a labor union for the workers of the attention economy, which is to say, all of us, a democratic institution that doesn't just advocate for you, but actually represents your interests so that you can have a voice in the design of technologies, so you can trust but also verify that they're on your side, so that you can be confident that when you spend your time with them, that will be time well spent. And this is possible, and there's a community of people that's emerged who are passionate about mapping out this plan of reform for the attention economy, of holding our good things to this higher standard, better metrics, better design principles, better business models, and more. And this is possible, and it's already in the works, but we need your help to make it a reality. We need to hear your voice in order to be a voice for you. And I think this is also important because, at the end of the day, our attention is the most precious resource we have. It's the ultimate finite resource. And the huge challenges that are facing humanity right now, before anything else, require us to give attention to the things that matter. And this is exactly what the digital attention economy is undermining by design. It will take time, but we can change the system. But in the meantime, let's continue to reap the benefits of our technologies, and let's continue to sort of support and affirm the people who create them, because they carry that flame of innovation and creativity that is so core to the human project. But before anything else, I think we need to organize and ask them for their attention so that we can show them what to do with ours. Like Diogenes, I think the first thing we need to do is to ask them to stand out of our light. Thank you for your attention.